Welcome back children. We will continue with the sources of rural credit. In the last video we learned about the non-institutional sources of credit. It is also known as informal sources of credit. Now in this video we are going to learn about the institutional sources of credit, which is also known as the formal sources of credit. Credit facilities for the farmers from the formal sector. You have learned these topics in class 10 regarding the formal sources of credit. Let us continue with the formal sources of credit or institutional sources of credit. Institutional sources. The point number 1 is cooperative credit. Its aim is to provide the credit at a lower rate of interest. So this cooperative credit, they are those institutions which aims to provide the credit facilities to the farmers at a lower rate of interest. So it is a kind of encouragement for the farmers to continue with their agricultural process because they are getting the credit facilities at a lower rate of interest. So risk factor is very less when we compare to non-institutional factors such as money lenders and rich landlords. Point number 2, land development banks. They provide credit to the farmers against mortgage of land. So the land of the farmers is a security that they are giving to the bank. So credit facilities will be given to the farmers, and when they repay the amount, the farmers will become safe. So it is a kind of credit facility which is given to the farmers against the mortgage of land. So their land is the security given to the banks. So they have to repay the amount for getting their land back. Point number 3 is commercial bank credit. Commercial banks providing credit to the farmers at a lesser rate. The commercial banks which are providing the credit facilities to the farmers at a lesser rate, they are commercial bank credit. Commercial banks also provide credit to the farmers at a lesser rate. So when they provide, it is again an encouragement for the farmers to take the loans from the banks, to get the credit facilities from the banks and to improve their agricultural works. Next is regional rural banks. They are opened up in those areas where there are no banking facilities. These regional rural banks, in certain regions where there are no banking facilities, the regional rural banks, they provide facilities to those areas where banking facilities are very less. At most remote areas where there are no banks, the regional rural banks will provide credit facilities to the people of those areas at a very lesser rate of interest. Then comes the role played by the government. Role played by the government in giving loans or credit facilities to the farmers. They are named as Takavi loans. What is that kind of loan? Which is given during the emergency situations like flood, famine, etc. during the natural hazards. So during those times, the loans provided to the farmers by the government. The credit facilities provided by the government to the farmers. They are known as Takavi loans, and the rate of interest on such loans as low as 6%. So it is a relief for the farmers, a huge relief for the farmers, and it is a credit facility provided by the government. Next is Nabard, very important institution. The Nabard is known as National Bank for Agricultural and Rural Development. Like how we speak about central bank as an apex institution, Nabard is also an apex bank which undertakes all the works related to the credit facilities given for agricultural purposes in the rural areas. So Nabard is an apex bank which coordinates other banks of rural credit. All the banks which gives credit facilities to the rural areas, those banks are coordinated by Nabard. How central bank, you learned how central bank coordinates other commercial banks, isn't it? Likewise, in giving the credit facilities to the rural people, the banks which are giving the credit facilities to the people of rural areas. Those banks are controlled and coordinated by Nabard. That is why Nabard is known as an apex bank of agricultural sector. Now, let us see which are the other functions of Nabard. It promotes the strength of other credit institutions like commercial credit, then regional rural banks, etc. We learned about commercial credit and regional rural banks. Commercial credit, I can just recollect, commercial rural credit means the credit facilities provided to the farmers at a lesser rate of interest. Regional rural banks means the banks which are established in at most remote areas where there are no banking facilities. So these banks, the strength of these banks in providing the credit facilities to the farmers is stimulated by Nabard. So Nabard has a major function. It promotes the strength of other credit institutions like commercial credit banks and regional rural banks. Next is, it provides financial assistance to the non-farm sectors. Farm sectors and non-farm sectors. Farming areas, farm sectors are purely related to agricultural activities, cultivation on land. Non-farm sectors means people who are engaged in other works other than the farm activities. For example, the people in the rural areas who are educated, who wants to start a computer institution, those people also require credit facilities. So providing credit facilities for such people who are apart from the farm activities, that is known as non-farm sectors. So providing credit facilities to the non-farm sectors by other banks, that is also stimulated by Nabard. So Nabard will coordinate all other banks for strengthening the credit facilities to the farm sectors as well as non-farm sectors of rural areas. Next is self-help groups, the term which is very much familiar to you, and you have made a detailed study regarding self-help groups in class 10. So no much detailed discussion is required for you with regard to self-help groups. You know, it is a group of women who works together, isn't it? And nowadays we can find self-help groups in the name of Ayalkootam, isn't it? So you are very familiar with the term self-help groups. Okay, now let us see what is the self-help groups. They are microfinance programs. They are microfinance programs. You very well know about it, Kudumbashree unit, isn't it? They are formed by a group of women who are engaged in different activities. So it is a great help for the women to encourage themselves so that they can make money by engaging in different activities, right? So they are known as microfinance programs. Self-help. So members in that particular group, they will help themselves to grow. That is known as self-help group. So that gives credit facilities to the groups in that to the members in that particular group. That is why they are known as microfinance programs. It is related to that unit itself, because you know the name of the word micro means what? Small unit. So the credit facility is limited to that small unit. So it consists of 15, there is a specific number of people who has to be in the self-help groups. So it is a group, small group of people. So credit facility is limited to those groups of people, and amount will not be that huge amount. So particular amount of money will be pooled among the members of the self-help groups, and in case if any member is in need of that particular amount, that will be given by the self-help group at a reasonable rate of interest. So it is a microfinance program. It is limited within that particular unit. That is why it is known as microfinance program. It is especially for the rural people who doesn't have access to the formal credit system like banks. It is very helpful for those members who doesn't have accessibility to the formal sources of credit like banks. Those who doesn't have accessibility to the formal sources of credit, they can depend on self-help groups. Now in the self-help groups, they will be pooling money from the members and it will be providing to the members whenever they are in need at a reasonable rate of interest, just as now I discussed. Then comes it has helped in the empowerment of women. The women can engage in economic activities, so it can be a financial help for the family. So it has helped, self-help groups has helped for the empowerment of women. So self-help groups is one among the important institutional sources of credit. So these are the important institutional sources of credit. So once again I can show all the points to you. Institutional sources of credit consist of cooperative credit, land development banks, commercial bank credit. Then comes regional rural banks, government and Nabard, finally self-help groups. Now, in spite of all these institutional sources, the credit facilities are still lagging in rural areas. Let us see what are the problems faced by the rural people regarding the credit facilities. So next heading that we are going to discuss is criticism against the rural banking. Point number 1, insufficiency. The volume of credit is insufficient. There is more demand for credit, but banks are not able to meet the demand of the people. So insufficient fund. So volume of the credit is insufficient when compared to the demand. People are demanding more and more, but insufficiency of credit facilities, the major problem associated with the rural areas. Point number 2, inadequate coverage of institutional sources. In certain areas, the banks and other financial institutions are not able to cover the whole area where the farmers are. So majority of the farmers are not getting the credit facilities. They cannot cover the whole area. Inadequate coverage of institutional sources. The whole area, the rural areas are not covered. So that also leads to insufficient amount of loan. Now next is inadequate amount of loan sanctioned to the farmers. Whatever the farmers are needed, they are getting less than what they are needed. So insufficient, inadequate amount of loan sanctioned to farmers. Farmers, they may need of a particular amount of money as credit facility, but they are not provided that much amount. Instead of that, they are provided less than what they are in need. That can create a problem because they will be moving as per a particular calculation, right? So if they are getting less than that, they have to suffer. Next is less attention to the poor farmers. Banks are not interested to provide loans to the poor farmers because poor farmers, sometimes they are not able to repay the amount with the rate of interest. So the banks are neglecting the poor farmers. This is a complaint that the poor farmers are neglected by the banks. Next is growing overdues. This can be related to the last point. Growing overdues can happen because of poor repaying capacity of farmers. There are some farmers, especially the poor farmers, who are not able to repay the loans with the rate of interest. Next is deliberately refusing to pay back the loans. There are certain farmers who are deliberately refusing to pay back the loans because they will be in need of that fund for some other purposes. So deliberately they will not be repaying the amount. So the growing overdues can happen because of two reasons. Point number 1 is deliberately not paying the amount and not having the capacity to pay the amount. So because of that, bank will refuse to provide loans to these farmers. So that is the other reason for the less amount of credit facilities in the rural areas. So these are the criticisms regarding the rural credit. So we have finished discussing institutional and non-institutional sources of rural credit and the critical appraisal of rural